Okay, great. People are starting to pour in. Good afternoon, everybody, if you're on the West Coast. Welcome to Litquake's Epicenter, a spring and summer virtual series produced by Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. I'm Jack Bulwer from Litquake, and we are streaming live from the Bay Area and around the world, also on Facebook right now. This is our final event in our Spring Summer Epicenter series, after which we will go dark and continue preparing for our Fall Festival, which will feature both virtual and live in-person events. Can you imagine? Those dates are October 7th through the 23rd, and details are coming soon at litquake.org. Tonight, we are honored to be able to present Emiko Jean and Gloria Chao, celebrating the launch of Emiko's new YA novel, Tokyo Ever After, which was released just a few weeks ago. The book is not only an instant New York Times bestseller, it's the YA pick for Reese Witherspoon's Hello Sunshine Book Club. How about that? And it's optioned for the movies already. Published by Flatiron Books, Tokyo Ever After has been described as the Princess Diaries meets Crazy Rich Asians. The story of an ordinary Japanese-American teenage girl living in a Northern California town, which is, quote, strung together with tie-dyes and Confederate flags. She discovers that her previously unknown father just happens to be the crown prince of Japan. So she travels to Japan, is received as a princess, and all sorts of crazy characters and adventures ensue. The book has received rave write-ups all over the place, from Marie Claire to Cosmopolitan, Entertainment Weekly, Good Morning America, Goodreads, Bustle, Publishers Weekly. It goes on and on. Shelf Awareness has called it, quote, fresh, funny, emotive, inspiring, and empowering. And a sequel is already in the works for 2022. Many thanks to Bia Dong and everyone at Eastwind Books for co-presenting this event. You can buy Emiko's book directly from Eastwind at the link in the chat area. And please support your local bookstores. A few things before we begin. Please feel free to ask the participants a question using the Q&A feature of the software down at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll get to those in the second half of the program. After the event, you'll be asked to fill out a very short survey. It's very short, very painless. These surveys are also essential to our efforts to keep these virtual programs for free. Don't forget to follow Litquake on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for our latest updates. We are so grateful for your support of the Litquake organization to allow us to continue to bring these events. The Bay Area was already a precarious place for artists and arts nonprofits, and we are now rebuilding our communities. If you believe in keeping literature a key component of San Francisco's cultural landscape, please consider dropping us a few dollars. Every bit does help. We accept donations on Venmo, PayPal, or directly at litquake.org. So let's get on with the show. Before Emiko Jean became a writer, she was an entomologist, a candle maker, a florist, and most recently, a teacher. She is also author of the books Empress of All Seasons and We'll Never Be Apart. She is speaking to us live from her home in Vancouver, Washington, where she lives with her husband and unruly twins. She will be chatting with Gloria Chao. After a brief detour as a dentist, Gloria has succumbed to the writer's life and is the critically acclaimed author of 3 novels, American Panda, Our Wayward Fate, and Rent a Boyfriend, which comes out in paperback later this year. When she's not writing, you can find her with her husband on the curling ice or hiking the Indiana dunes. She is joining us live from the great city of Chicago. So without further ado, please welcome Emmy and Gloria.
Hello.
So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited that we're going to be talking about one of my favorite reads this year. And as Jack mentioned, there are so many wonderful accolades for this book already. And yeah, we're going to dive into a lot of details. But first, Emmy, would you like to start us off with a brief reading?
I would love to. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to read from the first 3 pages of the novel, which is an article from the Tokyo Tattler. It's a fictitious tabloid that appears throughout the book. And this is the article that kicks it all off. And I did not bookmark my page as I should have, but here's what the page article looks like. The Tokyo Toddler. The lost butterfly gets her wings clipped. April 4th, 2021. A timeless elegance imbued Prime Minister Adachi's wedding to shipping heiress Haya Tajima at the luxurious New Atani Hotel. Though this is the PM's second marriage, his first wife passed away several years ago. No expense was spared. Men wore coattails, women dressed in silks, glasses bubbled over with Dom Perignon, black and white swans imported from Australia swam in the garden pools. Attendees were a veritable feast of Japan's upper crust society, including the imperial family. Even His Imperial Highness, Crown Prince Toshihito was present, despite his ongoing disagreements with the PM. But the focus wasn't on the feud or even the bride and groom for that matter. All eyes were turned to the newly minted princess, Her Imperial Highness Princess Izumi, aka the Lost Butterfly. The wedding marked her first formal interest into Japan society. Would she fly or fall? HIH Princess Izumi certainly dressed the part in a jade silk gown and Mikimoto pearls, pulled from the imperial vaults and gifted by the Empress. Press wasn't allowed inside the actual celebration, but by all accounts, the affair was flawless. So why was the lost butterfly spied boarding a train to Kyoto this morning? The Imperial Household Agency insists it was a planned, scheduled trip to the countryside, but we all know the Kyoto Imperial Villa is where royals go to repent. Last year, His Imperial Highness Prince Yoshihito stayed there while he recovered from an unauthorized trip to Sweden. It appears this butterfly's wings have been clipped. What could HIH Princess Izumi have possibly done to warrant an expulsion from the Tokyo Imperial Estate? No one has a clue, but somebody is definitely in trouble.
I love that you used the Tokyo Toddler and your publisher made the cutest little flyers to include with the books when they were promoting it. So I'd love to start this off by talking a little bit about the use of the Tokyo Toddler in the book. That excerpt perfectly summed up, how Izumi was thrust into this new unknown world to her, and she's being scrutinized. She's away from everyone she loves, and everybody is, judging how she is acting. And there's talk of scandals and proper behavior. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, what you use to, tackle writing that perspective for Izumi. Did you do any research? How did you, put yourself in her shoes? And how did you come up with the use of the Tokyo Toddler, which shows us so brilliantly and quickly, how tough things really are for her?
Yeah, so I knew Izumi was going to be entering a really, really large world with a lot of different characters in it. So right off the bat, I wanted a different device beyond Izumi's narration where we could give the reader a bigger picture of the imperial family, Japan and its culture. So it was pretty strategic on my part. And I think it's always fun too for the reader to know things, some things that happen before the protagonist. It kind of creates like an element of suspense, like they're waiting to find out when the other shoe is going to drop and when she's going to find out something. So you're kind of cringing the whole time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it creates so much suspense. It really, keeps you glued to the page. And so in the book, Izumi's voice is so unforgettable. It jumps right off the page. And I feel like, we get to know her so quickly and we're rooting for her right from the start. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found her voice and where the inspiration for her character comes from?
Sure. So when I start thinking about a novel, I always consider the character first. And it was so great actually because Izumi kind of came to me like fully formed. And I think as a writer, Gloria, I'm not sure if this is the same experience for you or not, but like characters rarely show up like fully formed, like, their whole arc. Like for me, they usually reveal themselves through like several revisions. So it was one of those like lightning bolt moments where like, I knew who she was, I could hear her voice. And I think the reason why is because Izumi was and is kind of very much a reflection of my high school self. So I remember being like the funny kid in school. And I think like Izumi, I use that as a shield to mask my insecurities, like what I was truly feeling, that I didn't feel like I belonged and I couldn't find myself home amongst my white classmates. So now kind of in retrospect, I think the reason why Izumi came to me so quickly and fully formed was because she has so much of myself in her.
I'm glad you mentioned the humor, because I think that is one of the main reasons that her voice is just so wonderful. And it was definitely one of my favorite parts of the book. I was laughing out loud at certain parts, and there were so many scenes that were memorable. So I personally feel like humor is one of the most difficult things to write, but I'd love to know, did you have a favorite humorous scene from this book?
Humor is like so hard to write. And I did, once I tapped into it, it felt pretty natural, like it was pretty organic. And I actually remember my editor being like, can we like drop some of the jokes? Like we actually had to peel away some of the books.
Oh, no.
I know. Someday I might publish them in like a blog or something. But
Yes.
but yeah, so one of my favorite scenes from the book is when Akio and Izumi first meet on the plane. So Akio is Izumi's bodyguard, and her very handsome bodyguard. I love a good bodyguard trope. And there is such a contrast to their characters. He's very buttoned up, and Izumi is like, I think she describes it as she's wearing her best Lululemon, so she's wearing like sweatpants. And there were just so many layers of humor to uncover there. It's through Izumi's voice with her anecdotes, because she can be kind of funny and sarcastic, but also through physical elements as well. Like she bends down and the seat makes like this unfortunate squeaky noise, which isn't only funny, but also lends to the tension. So there are all these like little small moments that can make a big impact, I think.
And so relatable, right? Who hasn't had one of those awful moments when the cute boy is right there?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up the bodyguard, because the romance in this was so swoony and I was shipping them the whole time. So can you introduce everyone a little bit more to Akio and his background and talk about how their relationship develops?
Sure. So Akio is an Imperial Guard, and he's a generational Imperial Guard, which means that the position has been handed down by his father. And so he takes his job and his duty very seriously. And he's very much the opposite of Izumi. At the outset of this novel, I was thinking I wanted this enemies to friends to lovers vibe. But now that I go back and I read through the pages and I look at the story again, I realize it's less enemies and more opposites. So opposites to friends to lovers, I think. And Akio really embodies Azumi's goal to get to know her culture, because in many ways he is the culture of Japan. His family has a long lineage serving the imperial family. And so he's kind of her key to unlocking all of that. And I think they butt heads because there's so much that they don't understand about each other. And that's where a lot of their conflict comes from.
And you mentioned kind of their opposites in the dynamic, and I felt like you used that so well, and there was so much banter between them that was both swoony, but also, humorous. And I was wondering, do you have a scene that's with them that was the most fun to write? Because it felt like, as a reader, that you just had so much fun writing their relationship.
I did. And well, romance is like, it's one of the most fun things for me to write. And especially when you have great characters to work with, it makes it all that much easier. So there's a scene in the latter half of the novel where they are in a bamboo grove. And it starts off a little tense because they've had a wobble before that. They've had like a little misunderstanding. But the scene kind of devolves into a nice friendship moment where Akio becomes a little bit more vulnerable. I don't want to say why, because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it was really one of those places in the book that hit all of my sweet spots as a writer. There was conflict and humor and deep meaning. There's some historical context too that's in that chapter. And it's also one of those scenes that didn't change much from draft to draft. So much changed with the book, but you always have those scenes, I feel like, where they're good from the beginning, and all it needs are tiny tweaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of historical context, did you have to do a lot of research while you wrote this? There was the setting of Japan that was so rich, but there also was a lot, with the imperial family and a lot of Japan's history. So, can you tell us a little bit about your process?
Yeah, so I, like most of my research centered around the imperial family, their history, their public and private lives. And it was no small feat, kind of piecing together biographies and online articles, tell all books, to kind of create a complete picture. A lot is known about the emperors, but the women in the imperial family aren't as well known. So kind of uncovering that was particularly challenging. And there were so many fun facts too about the imperial family that I didn't know, like none of them carry cash or have surnames. And I guess what really surprised me was how regimented their lives are. So their days are rigidly scheduled. I think, and don't quote me on this because I'm going to approximate the number. I'd have to look up the exact number. But the Emperor of Japan has around 1,500 events a year. And so he's busy all the time. And they're not allowed many freedoms that we take for granted.
Yeah, wow, that's 1,500. I can't even wrap my head around that.
I know, I was trying to do, as I was saying the number, I was trying to do the math in my head, like how many events that would average per day.
It's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
So another aspect of the book that I really loved was that Izumi had a really strong support system at home, both with her mother and with her friends. I especially love the friendship that Izumi has with Nora. They embody they're the epitome of ride or die. They're partners in crime. So can you tell us about why it was so important for you to establish this home system for Izumi from the start? And how did you manage to make it so strong and so clear in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, so I knew that, I considered having like more conflict with the friends or with the mom, but I backed off of that because by and large, I wanted her friends and family stateside to be positive and supportive. And that really helped like launch Izumi on her journey and gave her, I feel like, the courage to take such a big risk and like fly to Japan by herself and meet this person that she doesn't know, but that is her father, and be introduced to Japan as a princess. And I wanted most of the conflict to reside in Japan too. That's another reason why I didn't have her have any, big tense moments with friends or parents.
I think it worked really well. I loved, when she did have struggles, she could turn back to them and it really, balanced itself out really well. So we talked a lot about all the fun parts of this book to write. Was there any part that was especially difficult or that you found yourself rewriting a certain scene or certain character arc, anything like that?
Yeah, so I was talking to my editor a few weeks ago, and because I had been asked this question, and she reminded me that like the initial draft came in at 95,000 words, which is like, that's a pretty hefty for a YA book. Yeah. And she sent me like a really kind email back and was like, I think this needs to be 75,000 words. I had to cut out like 20K, which ended up being, I cut a few scenes with the dad, but the big cut was I cut 2 characters. So in the original novel, Izumi has a second lady in waiting and a tutor. And so I took that tutor and that second lady in waiting and I wrapped them up into Mariko, her other lady in waiting. And I think it reinforced Mariko's character arc, because then in the book, she has some really nice moments with Mariko, and they form a very solid friendship. So that was the right move. But yeah, there was an even larger cast at the beginning.
Which you already have such a large cast, so that must have been hard to keep track of. Do you have notes, you know, of who has what, you know, traits and things like that you?
Yeah, I have like I don't know what kind of software you use. I've heard great things about Scrivener, but I have never like been able to figure it out.
I haven't tried.
I'm too impatient to like even learn it. So I've opened it up and I've been like, oh, this is too hard. So I like just keep big notebooks with characters and everything. So I feel like it's kind of the old timey way. But, but yeah.
About, you know, having it, you know, that you can, you know, flip through, and I don't know, I personally like that too.
Yeah, I keep it like I have a big screen, and then I keep like it's almost like having a second screen, because I keep all the notes off to the side, so then you can have like just a bunch of stuff up there.
Right. I do that. So I want to talk a second about your cover, because it is so stunning. So it's really unique and it pops right off the page. And I was just wondering, you know, was this the first draft, or did it go through different iterations? And what was your first impression when you got it?
Yeah, and if you can tell, the color has changed from the art.
So the final's back there, and this is the previous. Yeah.
I'm not like a color person, so I don't know different colors very well, but they call this blue like Technicolor, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, so we knew from the beginning, and it was important to my editor and the whole team at Flatiron that there be a Japanese American girl on the cover. We all agreed that representation was needed. And so from there, we kind of just started to bat around ideas, and I sent my editor like a list of all things Japanese, like, you know, I'm sure you've done this too before, where you've sent kind of like inspiration lists, and then the art director or whoever takes it and tries to come up with a concept. But and we landed on origami, and I think someone said, well, what about paper cutouts? And from there, it just kind of rolled onward. We found this amazing artist, John Ed Vera, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, who's in the Philippines. And he did all of this beautiful paper cutout art. But to start with, he did character sketches. And I remember going back and forth quite a few times on what she should look like on the cover, like if she should be in profile, or if we should have her whole face showing, if her eyes should be open, if she should be smiling. It would be so hard, I'm sure, to be a cover artist, because you're trying to capture like a whole book in a single image. And I can't imagine how difficult it is, but John did a great job on this cover, and I'm really grateful.
One thing that blew my mind, you know, after having a little bit of experience with it, is how one small thing can change so much, right? When you were mentioning a smile or profile, that changes the entire look. Sometimes, you know, one line moving it a little bit. So it is pretty, you know, amazing to think about how much thought goes into this. And I assume that he actually made this, correct? Like he cut it out of paper and made which is amazing. Right before I was a writer, it didn't occur to me that so much went into this. And, you know, you see the image and you just assume like, oh, they created that, you know, somehow. But, you know, that he made this in real life, which is even more amazing.
It's so amazing. And I felt every time we went back for like a little revision, my writer soul like empathized with that. It's like you keep asking for more. And well, you know how like revisions kind of chip away at you. And so I felt bad. So I'm sorry, John, if we drove you crazy. But the ending it was beautiful.
Are you allowed to tell us a little bit about the sequel, or is it too early? Can you give us like a brief elevator pitch?
Shoot, I don't have an elevator pitch, at least one that can be Princess Diaries meets Crazy Rich Asians. So we'll see Azumi again. A lot of people have been asking me if it's like different characters within the Imperial family, and it's not. It follows Azumi, and she's still in Tokyo. She's still in the Imperial Palace, and we're gonna see some characters from the States come over. There will definitely be more kissing, more romance, more hijinks. That's all I can say.
And when is that going to be coming out? Do you have a release date yet, or is it too soon?
We don't have a release date. I'm assuming spring of 2022. They like to do these things a year apart. But yeah, we don't have a firm date yet.
So I was hoping to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit more about your writing journey and how you've gotten here. And so you wrote in a different genre before, is that correct? And so if you could tell us a little bit about, what it's been like a little bit to, try to pivot and write something with contemporary, with all this research and historical things. Was there anything that was especially difficult or fun?
Yeah, so as mentioned, my previous books. So I had Will Never Be Apart was a thriller, and then Empress of All Seasons was a fantasy, and now I've landed in this contemporary realm. They're all YA books, but yeah, I have jumped genres quite a bit. I actually, when I wrote Will Never Be Apart, I was a 2-book contract, and I wrote a second thriller. And that one ended up being passed on by the publisher. And that was really hard. I think, whenever you put your heart into a book, and then when someone's like, we don't want this at this time, it's like they're telling you that your heart is ugly or something. So that was difficult. And after that, I decided I wanted to pivot. And I had also, just as an individual, been changing, and I wanted to be more in touch with my Japanese heritage. And so I thought writing fantasy that was steeped in Japanese folklore and myths would be so fun and would be a great exploration tool for me. And so that's why I decided to write Empress of All Seasons, which eventually was published. And then after that, I had kids, and that changes kind of everything. So my worldview and my journey shifted again. And I was really thinking about, I have boy-girl twins. And in particular, I was thinking about my daughter and what books she would read growing up, what books I read growing up, and how I had never read a book when I was younger that featured a Japanese American protagonist. And I had never read a book even that was by a Japanese American author. And I didn't want that same experience for her. I loved the Princess Diaries when I was younger. And so it felt really natural and important to kind of recreate that story for her, but have, just to show her that she can have a happily ever after too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's so important. Have you always known that you wanted to write, or was it something that you found later? Were you writing stories as a child? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I did write when I was younger, but again, when I look back and see that I didn't read anything by Japanese American writers, and or really any Asian American writers, so sparse. And so I think at a very young age, subconsciously, I felt like that pathway was closed to me. And so even when I dared to draft my first novel, which was later in life, even though I was still young, I was in my 30s, I used a white character because I think, subconsciously I was like, books with white characters are published. And so now looking back on that, I realized how formative all of that was leading up to it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have always been a really prolific reader. And what happened was I was really unhappy at a job I was working at, and I would, and that's when I first started to seriously write. And that's when I first started to seriously write We'll Never Be Apart. And I would pretend like I was sending emails and I'd be typing chapters into my email. So, yeah, yeah. So that's kind of my twisted, circuitous journey.
Yeah. For any aspiring writers who might be listening, I was wondering if you could give them some advice. And in particular, I'd love to know if you have any tips about writing humor, because as we already touched upon, it is so difficult.
Yeah. So I have 2 sticky notes that are like on my desk. And one of them says, fail better, which I originally heard from Margaret Atwood, but I think it's actually a quote from a play by Samuel Beckett. And for me, what I take away from that quote is that to remember that there are successes in the failure. And each time you write something and it doesn't work and you revise it, that is a triumph in itself. And the other sticky note is don't give up. I wrote that when my second novel was passed on by my publisher, and I've kept it. It's moved around with me. And it's an important message to keep pressing forward. As for writing humor, I think it's good to look for like small moments where you can surprise your audience. So like when we were talking about that moment between Akio and Izumi, and she bends over and the chair makes an unfortunate squeaking noise. I don't think the audience was expecting that. And so it's a surprising and cringy moment, but also funny and relatable too. Second to that, I think it's important that you know your audience, like what type of humor they like. And so I think a lot of people automatically think teens and sarcasm go hand in hand, which can be good, but should be used sparsely. But I also think beyond that, teens like smart humor, like irony and parodies and innuendo. I love innuendo.
Those are great tips. So just a reminder to everyone that we'll be taking questions in a little bit, so please put them in the Q&A section below. So a few more questions from us, and then we'll move on to your questions. So Jack mentioned at the beginning in your intro that you've had a lot of different jobs. So I'm just curious, do you draw any inspiration from those at all for any of your books?
I do. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I actually think the job jumping was because I hadn't really landed on like the right career yet. I've stayed with writing now for years and years, and this is where I will stay. Well, what I am looking forward to is I worked in a zoo for a little while, and I dabbled in entomology, which is studying bugs. And I would love to write a book that had a heroine in it or some sort of entomology aspect to it. I think that would be so fun.
That's really fun. It's not too late. Izumi could suddenly discover, a passion for entomology as well.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, what have you been reading? Is there anything you've enjoyed, TV or books that you can recommend to the audience?
Yeah, so I just finished Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boley, which is a young adult novel, and it is a thriller, and it is so thrilling. And that was so good. I've also been reading Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee, which is so good. She's so great with historical novels and such a beautiful writer. And those are the 2 that have been on my nightstand. I also just secretly started, there was a book by, I don't know why I say secretly, I'm not ashamed, that just came out by Flatiron that's about the Real Housewives, like the production, everything from it. And I picked it up and I couldn't put it down. I'm almost like halfway through it. I'm a big Real Housewives fan, so I have I've been reading that and enjoying it.
That sounds like a good way to kind of unwind at the end of the day.
It's a little vacation for your mind, it feels like. So it's been really fun to read.
Yeah. So again, congratulations on so many accolades. The book, it was a Reese Book Club pick. It hit the indie bestseller list, the New York Times list. So I'm just wondering if you had a chance to celebrate, if there was anything you did to, commemorate this huge milestone.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a big family dinner, and that was nice to be with family and eat good food and be together. We've kind of, since the pandemic started, which is so weird to say, still pandemic. It's like part of our lives now and our history. Been kind of keeping in our little bubble, but it was fun.
And what was it like the moment that you found out? I assume your editor or your agent called you with the news and.
Yeah, so I got an email. So I didn't know this, but like the list is published on a Wednesday at like 7 p.m. East Coast time. So and so over on the side it'd be 3 p.m. Wait, no, 4 p.m. But publishers get it a little early. So I got an email. Are you trying to do that? Trying to do the math when it all comes out? So publishers get it a little bit early. So early afternoon last week on Wednesday, I got an email that said, okay, you're on the list. And then we all hopped on the phone and we were screaming. And I was actually kind of at a loss for words. And it was exciting. And what it really means, though, is that, the book is reaching an audience and finding its readers. And that's the best part.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to take a question from the audience that just popped up. They would like to know, how did you go about finding an editor? What was the publishing process like? Did it take a long time? Did you have to go to several companies to get someone to publish your novel?
Yeah. So if you want to be traditionally published, you have to have an agent, and agents are the gatekeepers to the publishing houses, and they're the ones that have the connection to editors. So what you do, and this is it kind of in a nutshell, distills the process into like 5 seconds, where really this was like a year-long process for me finding an agent, is you write the book and then you query agents, which is basically like the blurb on the inside of a book, a little mini synopsis. And then based on that, the agent will request your manuscript. If they like it, they'll offer representation. Most of the time, you have to work on the novel with your agent, which has been my case, and actually has been my case for every single novel I've worked on it with my agent. She's an editorial agent. And then your agent says one day, I think it's ready to go on submission. And your agent will put together a list of editors, and then you submit to them, and then you wait and bite your nails and wait some more. And if an editor likes it, they'll make an offer on it, or if they don't like it, they'll pass on it. So that's kind of like like a 2 or 3 year journey in 10 seconds.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Is there anything else about Tokyo Ever After that you want to share with people who are listening? Either some more details about it or anything fun about your process writing it?
Yeah, I hope people will read it and enjoy it. I like to think of stories as windows and mirrors. So, like you and I were just talking about, like being able to see, your reflection in it and see yourself in the story, or see through to, as you would a window, to another perspective. There has been a rise in violence with the Asian American community in the United States. And I really hopes that in some sense this can build empathy, that this can show one version of the Asian American experience, and shows us as whole and rich and complex people.
I'm just curious because, it's something that I think about a lot when I write, but sometimes you do feel a lot of pressure, right? This burden to, there's so little representation that you feel like have this huge responsibility. And personally for me, I almost had to push that out of my mind, right? Because if you think too much about it, you're never going to get any words down. So I'm just curious, what do you think about when you write? Do you consider this? Do you try to push it aside? Do you think about it later in revisions? I'm just curious, as someone who goes through it also.
Yeah, so same, exactly same. There is so much pressure to get it right. And exactly what you said, it's because there's just not enough representation, and people want a story that speaks to them and, is like their experiences. And I went through the motions writing Empress of All Seasons and Tokyo Ever After. Like, should I write this novel? Can I write this novel? Is it even my place to write this novel? All those questions. And what I had to come back to is that it's never going to be perfect for everyone. You just have to make it perfect for yourself. And as long as you're writing your authentic, true story, that's really all you can do, And so it's hard to get to that place. But once you do, it's a good place to be in. I don't know if you feel the same or not, but that's kind of where it's taken me. And I don't know what'll happen next. I feel like it's kind of circle back around to it as well.
That's actually pretty much what I do too. I try to focus on, well, I can't represent everyone, but I can get one, honest representation in this, and that's my own. It definitely feels.
It just goes to show that we need more books and more writers. And
So if you're listening and you want to write, please do it. We need your stories. We want to hear your voices. And do you have any other tips for people who are trying to get published, either for the agenting, for, what to write about, how to get out there and get their voices heard?
I always come back to the don't give up. I went on a writer's retreat once, and someone said, publishing shows us failures where there are none. And that really resonated with me. And just every time you finish a manuscript, recognize it for what it is, that you have finished a book. And whether or not you get an agent or a publisher, you have to kind of get to the point where that validation comes from yourself. So you're just fulfilled in doing the work, and not necessarily with, publication. All that stuff I feel like is just icing on the cake, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another audience question. What coming of age stories inspired you to write Tokyo Ever After?
That's a good question. Well, obviously Princess Diaries. That is a great coming of age story. It's been a while since I have thought about like inspirational stories that I read when I was a young adult. And I should know the answer to this question because I get asked it. I loved Ella Enchanted. Do you remember that book?
Yes. Oh my.
And I loved Matilda, which skews a little bit younger, but I loved that. I loved everything by Roald Dahl. So those kind of books.
Were there other books that inspired you, not specifically for Tokyo Ever After, but just that made you want to become a writer?
I'm trying to think. So I was like in high school, just I'm not so much into it anymore. I was super into the Beat Generation and like the Merry Pranksters and everything like that, like Jack Kerouac and everything. Now looking back, their writing is pretty problematic, but I remember.
For a lot of things, right? And there's so many things that you look back and you're like, oh.
But I do remember feeling like there was such an energy to the words and the writing, and there was so much movement behind them that I remember feeling very creative after I had read a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a funny question, but did you ever think about the imperial family when you were writing this? You know, like if someone was going to pick it up and read it, or were you like, that would be amazing because that would mean, you know, that would be a huge deal? Or did it kind of weigh on you a little bit, like, oh, are they going to be upset that I wrote X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, yes to all of that. Like, yeah, I don't like, I don't think I want them to read it. I don't think I've done anything bad or salacious, but it kind of goes back to that whole thing, like, did I do this right? Did I represent this right? And then I tried so hard with it, but you know, you can't always get everything right. But then again, I think like if they read it, and that would also be so amazing. So I don't know, I go vacillate back and forth between it.
Yeah, it's like
that question made me nervous.
Sorry. Can you tell us anything else about the movie option, or is that still, I know it's always a little bit hard for when you moderate because you don't know, you know, how much people are allowed to share about certain things.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like happening. I hesitate to share anything or even like use any sort of terms like development or anything like that because I actually don't know, like.
But it's definitely been optioned. It's
yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to get in trouble and like drop the wrong term and then be like, this is not happening. But yeah, it would just, it'd be so great. For me, like the first time that I saw Crazy Rich Asians, like in a theater, like it was a hold my chest kind of moment. And no matter if it's Tokyo Ever After or another wonderful book by an Asian American author, seeing Asian Americans on screen is like, it's so important, and we're so underrepresented in media that would just be, it would be amazing, I think.
Do you get to be involved in the process? I know it's so iffy, you know, some authors get to be more involved, some don't. So, you know, just along with the whole discussion about representation, do you get to consult on things? Do you get to at least say, you know, I want, like, this is more authentic, this isn't, you know, I want someone like this cast, not.
Yeah, so I do, and I have been consulted on a few things. I know that representation is really important to them, and they are like looking for Japanese American writers. And so I'm thankful that they were kind of have the same vision for it in that regard. But I pretty much have taken a back seat to most of it. I was working on another book this last year, so and working on Tokyo Dreaming at the same. I was working on 2 books this last year, so I haven't had much time for that side of it.
Tokyo Dreaming is such a good name, by the way. Same with Tokyo Ever After.
We had a Tokyo Dreaming. So Tokyo Ever After came like also in one moment, and that always felt like the right title. But we kind of went through a rigmarole to figure out to land on Tokyo Dreaming. I think it was before that was Tokyo Everlasting.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. But then someone was like, it sounds like Tuck Everlasting. And then I was like, oh
no. Yeah. Now that you say it, it's all I hear.
I know, it's one of those things like, oh, it's now all I can hear. I think I wanted, like, I had pitched like Tokyo with Love, but that sounded too familiar to other titles. So, and then we landed on Tokyo Dreaming.
Current read is this one, so it would have been very similar.
I know. So that's good.
This is very good, by the way. I highly recommend.
I haven't gotten it yet, but it's on my TBR.
So one more question from the audience. What made both of us decide to write novels predominantly for young people?
I'm gonna let you go that first. Do you want to take it first so I can think of my answer?
Happy to. So my answer is actually a little bit funny because I focus on the story idea first, and I actually had a really hard time placing American Panda. The first draft of the book, it's about someone whose parents want her to become a doctor, but she doesn't, which is inspired by my own life. And in the first version of the draft, she was a senior in college applying to medical school, which no one in publishing knew what to do with because young adult traditionally ends in high school, and then women's fiction jumps quite a bit forward. And I rewrote American Panda so many times, and it wasn't until I made her 17, a freshman in college, and she skipped a grade, that I even was able to, get an agent with it. And even then, publishing kept telling me, we don't know what to do with the college story, because this was back in 2016, and there were almost no college YA stories out there, or college stories, period, anywhere. There was this huge gap in the market. And so really, it was me trying to figure out, how can I make this work? And at the heart of all of my books, I've realized that they are all coming of age stories. And so I worked very hard to try to fit my ideas into the YA market. And even with Rent a Boyfriend, we're talking about ideas of, potentially marriage. And there was no way I could make them in high school, but it also was still a coming of age story. And the main character is 19. The love interest is 21. And again, I had to work really hard to, convince my publisher, like, this is still YA, it's still a coming of age story. So in some ways, the coming of age decided it for me, but it definitely wasn't a black and white answer for me, that I should be writing for young people.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I didn't know that American Panda started there. Yeah. That has me thinking now, because I read the book and I'm like thinking about the characters and everything. I'm gonna have to go back and flip through the pages and see if there's any into that. How many
remnants?
Yeah, any remnants of that. Yeah, so for me, I love young adult books, and that's what I was reading at the time. So really, I had already been kind of conditioned for that voice. And then, going back to my bio, like, I was an entomologist, a candle maker, fit in. And so I think that was why it was kind of a natural fit for me.
We have a lot of similarities. We both, struggled to find our careers. So I think it makes sense, right, that we explore it in our fiction and we want to write about it in YA. So that makes sense.
All makes sense.
Yep. I was actually also predominantly reading YA at the time, which is funny because I tried so hard to fit everything first into women's fiction. And then when the person I ended up signing with as my agent was like, oh, this sounds more like a YA book, it was kind of like, oh, of course, I should have realized this all along. It's like all I read. But somehow, when you're in it, it's hard to see clearly, even though now looking back, it's like, oh, it was so obvious.
Yeah, I think that just points to why writers need great editors and agents, because they really do, they have great insight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're almost out of time here. Is there anything left that you want to say to everyone? Does anyone have any last minute questions they want to fit in? I don't see any new ones in the chat, so.
I don't either.
Well, thank you so much, Litquake, for having us. Thank you for this lovely conversation.
Thank you.
After, it was one of my favorite reads. Please pick it up. It is so funny, so charming, so swoony, and I feel like I've said that word so much, but I can't think of another word for their how much I shipped them and love their relationship. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, thank you to Eastwind Books for supplying the books for our event. And there are links in the chat for where you can pick up Tokyo Ever After.
Thank you. Thank you, Gloria, very much for hosting this and chatting with me, and Litquake and Eastwind Books. Thank you.
Thank you.